1. The porch violation. The air was wrong. I, Mimi, had been performing my morning ritual, a crucial census of the ambient scents along the west perimeter of the garden wall, when the anomaly hit my olfactory sensors. The air should have been a symphony of controlled variables: the clean, sterile dust of asphalt, the sharp, metallic tang of the sprinkler system, the muted, sweet decay of compost from the turner's yard. Instead, there was a shocking, brazen chord of offense, the unmistakable, aggressive signature of Brutus, the oafish bulldog from 2 houses down, amplified by the porous wood fibers of the Muller's front porch. It was fresh, it was foul, and worst of all, it was intentional. I lifted myself onto the apex of the wrought iron fence, securing my sleek, sapphire-point body against the cool metal. My sapphire eyes narrowed, absorbing the crime scene. The Muller's porch, a pristine, sun-drenched expanse designed for delicate human rituals like sipping tea and reading, was tainted by a violation of the first covenant: thou shalt not defile shared territory. This wasn't merely a private matter between the Mullers and Brutus's human. This was a direct assault on the fragile, meticulously managed social contract that allowed the NCA, Neighborhood Council of Animals, to operate in harmony alongside the oblivious bipeds. Brutus, driven by the purest form of canine idiocy, had not simply mistaken the porch for a suitable spot. He had targeted it, leaving his aggressive marker of possession right next to a potted geranium. The audacity was astounding. I remembered Brutus. His mind was a vast, unorganized library of primal impulses: food, territorial marking, and the inexplicable desire to chase reflections. He possessed an emotional complexity roughly equivalent to a garden hose. His human, a man the NCA referred to as the loud walker, Mr. Henderson, was equally unperceptive, reliant on leash pulls and shouted commands, unable to decipher the nuanced language of scent and posture that ruled our world. The violation wasn't just excremental, it was existential. The dogs, especially the powerful, stubborn breeds like Brutus, were allowed to ignore the territorial demarcation lines established by centuries of shared instinct. The whole suburban peace would collapse into anarchic scent-marking warfare. We would be left with a neighborhood governed by pure, unsophisticated scent aggression, a political landscape too crude for civilized thought. I descended the fence in a single, fluid motion, my paws barely disturbing the dew on the grass. The sun was climbing, and soon the heat would cure the offense into a permanent, intractable stain, intensifying the volatile scent signature and drawing the attention of lower-order scavengers. Action was required immediately. I activated my mental communication channel, a low-frequency thought pulse that bypassed human auditory limits. My first pulse was directed toward the most crucial and often most tedious member of our council. Mimi to Rufus. Priority read: porch violation. I repeat, porch violation. The response, a slow, deep vibration of reluctant thought, arrived a full 20 seconds later, heavily laced with the smell of old leather and recent naps. Rufus confirms reception. Mimi, please confirm severity. Is this a mere spritz miscalculation or a full structural breach? Rufus, the aging beagle, was the traditional canine liaison, valued for his massive olfactory database and his commitment to procedure, but hampered by his constant need for clarity and his adherence to outdated protocols. It is a structural breach, Rufus. A statement. Brutus has targeted the Muller porch. We must convene the NCA at the customary neutral zone before midday. Bring shadow. And try to look less like a discarded carpet. The fate of the covenant, the subtle arrangement that kept our human companions from truly descending into chaos, rested on this meeting. The investigation had begun. I took one last deep, disdainful breath of the polluted air and moved toward the designated meeting spot, the old oak at the center of the Parkway Circle. The sun was rising, and with it, the stakes of the suburban war. Porch violation was merely the first move in a sophisticated game of territorial chess, and I intended to checkmate Brutus before the first grass stain faded. The purity of the neighborhood depended on it. To the Neighborhood Council of Animals, NCA, the designated neutral zone was the base of the ancient pin oak on the Central Parkway Circle, its roots providing a stable, scent-neutral foundation where territorial aggression was suspended by mutual agreement. By 10:30 a.m., the core members of the NCA had assembled, their postures reflecting their rank and internal disposition. Rufus, the beagle, arrived first, predictably, his entire body language a study in procedural diligence. His nose, a complex array of sensory input far surpassing any human technology, was held low, constantly processing the history of the ground, searching for precedents. His aura was thick with the scent of aged wisdom and a faint overlay of the beef jerky he'd managed to pilfer. He was the parliamentarian, the custodian of tradition, and currently he looked deeply worried, his long ears dragging slightly in the grass. I positioned myself, Mimi, atop the oak's first low branch, a position that granted visual dominance and maintained my aesthetic distance from the damp grass and the emotionally turbulent canines. I am a creature of aesthetics and logic. Elevated observation is my natural state. Shadow, the sleek Abyssinian, arrived last. He didn't so much walk as materialize from the dense rhododendrons across the street. Shadow is the NCA's chief of surveillance, a master of silence and light manipulation. His copper-gold coat and emerald eyes rendered him nearly invisible among the late-morning shadows. He moved with the predatory grace of a creature whose thoughts are always 5 steps ahead of his paws. He simply sat, tail curled perfectly, his thoughts a clean, crisp line of analytical inquiry. "The matter is the porch violation," I stated, my voice a low, resonant purr that carried authority. "Brutus, the bulldog of the Henderson household, has deposited a fecal marker on the Muller porch. This is not incidental. It is a direct challenge to the territorial treaty of 1998. Rufus let out a heavy sigh, a sound that in human terms meant this is going to be complicated. "Mimi, we must consider the Brutus factor. His mind operates on a highly simplified binary system. He lacks the malice for intentional covenant violation. He is simply unsophisticated. Did the Muller human provoke him? Did they neglect their designated boundary scent renewal protocol?" "Irrelevant," I countered, flicking my tail. "The covenant protects the human's aesthetic territory, regardless of their own incompetence. Porch is sacred ground. The act is the violation. The severity is magnified by the location. It is a visible structural breach that will provoke a human-on-human confrontation, thus jeopardizing our entire stable food supply and nap schedules." Shadow finally spoke, his thoughts a razor-sharp whisper. "The danger is escalation. The Hendersons deploy chemical deterrents, citrus-based sprays, repellent powders. It pollutes the entire olfactory landscape. If the Mullers build a fence, it alters Slink's established surveillance routes." "Precisely," I affirmed. "The Hendersons must be made to confine Brutus by their own will. We cannot directly intervene. We must manipulate the variables until the human, in his infinite, clumsy blindness, arrives at the correct conclusion." Rufus shook his head, his ears drooping further. "The protocol requires irrefutable evidence. We need multiple sightings, a timestamp, and a clear motive analysis. The Squirrel Consortium must be consulted. They occupy the aerial vantage point." I felt a surge of pure disdain. The squirrels? They communicate in frantic, disjointed bursts about imminent aerial invasion. Their evidence is unreliable, their focus is on nut storage, and their motives are purely selfish. But, as you insist on following outdated procedures, Rufus, you and Shadow will attempt to extract a cohesive statement from the Squirrel Consortium. I will analyze the human element. We need not just proof, but the mechanism by which Brutus escapes confinement." Council agreed, though Rufus moved with the grudging reluctance of a bureaucrat forced to use a floppy disk. Shadow vanished before the meeting was officially adjourned, already a ripple in the wind, moving toward the high canopy where the squirrels held court. I remained on my branch, cleaning a paw with surgical precision, contemplating the sheer effort required to maintain order in a world shared with dogs and humans. The difficulty of the task only strengthened my resolve. Covenant would be upheld, even if I had to dismantle the entire operation from the bottom up.
Subscribe with us now and stay connected as we journey through every chapter together. Now back to our story.
3. The unreliable witness. The squirrel consortium, led by a manic, twitching alpha female named Squeaky, inhabited the massive ancient oak that provided the primary scent post and high-ground observation point overlooking the entire block. Gaining an audience was less a matter of requesting a meeting and more a matter of enduring a theatrical, paranoid performance. Shadow and Rufus met me at the base of the tree. Rufus was already panting, the immense complexity of his beagle nose struggling to filter the 100 competing scents of the squirrel's horde: rotting nuts, fermented berries, and the faint, dusty scent of human attic insulation. I, Mimi, had chosen a spot 5 feet away, maintaining a necessary buffer against the neurological chaos the squirrels invariably generated. Squeaky descended with 2 lieutenants, stopping abruptly on a low branch, tails vibrating like plucked strings. Her voice, a high-pitched, frantic series of chirps and whistles, was almost impossible to process. Danger! Danger! The great shadow passes twice. The sky is glass. Did you bring the payment? The nut futures are volatile. Focus, Squeaky, I commanded, projecting my calm, resonant purr. We require testimony regarding the porch violation. Brutus. Monday morning. Did you see the sequence of events? Squeaky's head rotated 90 degrees, her eyes darting from Shadow to Rufus, then scanning the empty sky for predatory birds. The big dog. Yes. He came from the south boundary. Smelled wrong. Smelled like soap. A deceptive scent. He approached the wood platform. The human of the wood platform was inside. They did not look up. We warned them. We threw pine cones. They thought it was wind. Did you observe the act? Rufus barked, his voice losing its parliamentary composure in his frustration. Did you see the moment of the deposit? The confirmation of the offense? Squeaky's lieutenants erupted into a rapid, unintelligible chorus of chirps. It was a blur. It was large. It was brown. The sun was in our eyes. The smell was a distraction. We were planning the raid on the bird feeder. The great seed horde is our priority. The big dog is secondary. Shadow intervened, his tone utterly devoid of emotion, a pure analytical probe. Squeaky described the posture. Did his tail wag? Was the head down in an aggressive posture or raised in a gesture of relief? Was the deposit made swiftly or was there preparation? Shadow understood that posture was the true language. A low tail and quick deposit suggested a necessary elimination. A high tail and slow, deliberate placement suggested a territorial assertion. Squeaky paused, her twitching momentarily arrested by the precision of Shadow's query. She chewed rapidly on an invisible object. The tail was rigid, held in a mid-level arch. He circled. Twice. He observed the geranium. He looked directly at the human's front door. This was not functional. This was a statement of domain. He was celebrating the absence of consequence. Her testimony was chaotic, but the description of the rigid tail was a critical piece of evidence. That single physiological detail supported my initial assessment. Brutus had performed an act of intentional territorial dominance, not a simple lapse in canine etiquette. However, the squirrel consortium demanded payment, not in kind but in intellectual property. They demanded that Rufus use his nose to locate and verify the freshness of the best hiding spots for the acorn harvest before they confirmed the rigid tail. Rufus groaned, knowing the commitment of his olfactory resources to this task would render him useless for true scent analysis for an hour. But the NCA required the testimony. While Rufus dutifully began sniffing the roots of the tree for optimal acorn decay rates, I exchanged a silent, knowing look with Shadow. We had the motive confirmed by the most unreliable source in the neighborhood, a source driven only by chaos and acorns. Now we needed the opportunity, the systemic flaw in the human element that allowed Brutus to roam free every morning. The evidence of the rigid tail was excellent for the NCA court, but for solving the actual human-on-human problem, we needed the predictability of their routine. The investigation was now moving into the most volatile, unpredictable field, the human mind. For the human element, the NCA investigation stalled, suffocating under the very evidence it sought. The rigid tail testimony proved Brutus's intent, but the problem was systemic. Brutus was always free in the mornings. Mimi had to shift the focus from what Brutus did to how the loud walker, Mr. Henderson, Brutus's owner, allowed the violation to happen. The solution, I realized, lay not in canine logic, but in dissecting the banal, ritualistic absurdity of the human morning. I spent the next 48 hours observing the Henderson household from the high vantage point of my sunroom window. The humans are creatures of astonishing self-imposed complexity, yet their routines are rigid, brittle, and easily exploited. The loud walker's morning involved a precise six-step ballet of obliviousness. Caffeine ritual, 6:45 a.m. Loud walker enters the kitchen, activating the noisy electric machine. His focus is entirely inward, driven by chemical dependence. The screen paralysis, 6:55 a.m. Loud walker sits on the porch swing, staring blankly at his small illuminated screen. This is the moment of maximum sensory withdrawal. The leash fetish, 7:10 a.m. He attaches the leash to Brutus, but only for a brief performative stroll to the mailbox where he retrieves the paper. The leash is a symbol, not a tool for control. The fence drop, 7:15 a.m. The critical flaw. Upon returning from the mailbox, Brutus is unclipped inside the fence line, while the loud walker retreats immediately to the kitchen to begin his news ritual on the television. He assumes the fence is a barrier against nature, forgetting that Brutus is merely a contained force of nature. Porch run, 7:17 a.m. Brutus, now unconstrained and driven by a 2-day backlog of internal pressure and his simple desire for territorial expansion, makes his 2-minute dash through the gap in the rose bushes to the Muller porch. The retreat, 7:20 a.m. Brutus returns, satisfied, and collapses onto his dog bed, leaving the human entirely unaware of the chaos he has wrought. The window of opportunity for Brutus was a mere 2 minutes, protected by the human's absolute focus on the digital screen and the televised voices. The loud walker was blind to anything not broadcast through an electronic device. His reliance on noise and light made him utterly deaf to the critical sounds of Brutus slipping out or the subtle shifting of the gate latch. I transmitted this analysis to Shadow, who was hiding beneath a row of carefully sculpted boxwoods. The solution is mechanical, Shadow. The human believes the fence is the defense. He is wrong. The defense is the leash and he abandons it. We must exploit the assumption of security. Shadow's reply was direct. The fence latch is loose. It requires an upward pull and a specific rotation to disengage. Brutus, at full speed, hits the gate hard enough to bounce it open, but he is too focused on the external stimulus, the porch, to notice. The complexity of human negligence was almost maddening. They designed their systems to fail in predictable ways. They assumed locks worked merely by closing them, ignoring the physics of momentum and the sheer, unbridled ambition of a large dog seeking territorial release. We needed the evidence to present to Brutus, but we also needed a plan to weaponize Brutus's routine against his own human, forcing a change in behavior without direct NCA interference. The problem was not Brutus's bladder, it was the loud walker's remote control. The NCA could only operate through manipulation of the physical environment, forcing the humans to react to a problem in their own domain. We had the how and the why. Now we needed the proof and the how to fix it implemented simultaneously. The next phase required an operative of pure, focused canine drive. The job was too delicate for Rufus, too large for myself, and too visible for Shadow. It required slink.
Let's stay connected. Subscribe and join me on this journey every step of the way.
5. The operative is deployed. The selection of Slink, the hyper-focused rat terrier, was a matter of ruthless efficiency. Slink was a creature of kinetic energy, capable of sustained, silent motion and driven by a neurotic need to complete any assigned task. His mind was a single clean wire leading from problem to solution, uncluttered by the philosophical debates that plagued Rufus or the aesthetic concerns that dominated my own thoughts. Slink was deployed for one task: securing the final undeniable evidence. The rendezvous occurred under the cover of the recycling day chaos, a perfect storm of noise, movement, and human distraction. Slink arrived in a low crouch, practically vibrating with suppressed energy, his small body coiled and ready. He smelled of fresh earth and the faint metallic scent of the chain-link fence, pure, unadulterated focus. "The objective is the confirmation run," I instructed, laying out the details on a patch of concrete, using tiny, carefully placed stones to represent the porch, the gate, and the rosebush. "You must track Brutus's 7:17 a.m. run tomorrow. You must remain unseen by both the human and Brutus. Your primary task is time and position confirmation." Shadow, utilizing a piece of broken ceramic shard to demonstrate the viewing angle, added, "You must position yourself under the Muller porch, the space between the foundation and the deck lattice. From there, you will have an unobstructed view of the violation zone. Capture the entire sequence. We require the complete cycle: the approach, the circle, the rigid tail, and the human's lack of awareness." Slink absorbed the data, his pointed ears swiveling, his eyes locked on the ceramic shard. He didn't ask about danger, reward, or motive. He simply wanted to know the boundary of the mission. Confirmation run. Porch. 7:17 visibility 0. "Correct," I purred. "But the mission includes an added layer of risk. You must also obtain the scent marker profile." Slink twitched. This was a deviation from the plan. Scent markers are volatile, dangerous intelligence. "The evidence is not enough," I explained. "We must have the chemical signature. Before Brutus executes the violation, you must tag the front porch post with a minute-controlled amount of your own pheromone. Then you must tag the rosebush at the Henderson house with an equally minute controlled amount of the Muller porch scent. This is the redirective prep." This was the stroke of genius, or insanity. I was using Slink not just as a spy, but as a biological engineer cross-contaminating territories to confuse Brutus's simple, powerful internal GPS. By linking the porch's territory with Slink's own dominant scent, I was setting up a trigger. By placing the Muller scent on the rosebush, I was telling Brutus, in a language he couldn't ignore, that his true territorial priority had shifted. Slink did not question the ethical implications of the redirective prep. He merely processed the physics. Low crawl required. Time required, 15 seconds per marker. Risk level high. Rufus, smelling the complexity of the plan, whined softly. "Mimi, this is beyond the NCA mandate. Scent manipulation is invasive." "It is necessary, Rufus," I stated with finality. "We are not simply enforcing the covenant, we are restoring the balance. The human element has failed us. We must become the correction." Slink gave a sharp, silent nod, the rat terrier equivalent of signing a contract, and then flowed away into the shadows beneath the ornamental grasses, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his determined scent. The fate of the neighborhood, and the continued existence of clean porches, now rested on the skill and speed of our most volatile operative. The surveillance mission was greenlit. 6. The interspecies data exchange. The waiting was the hardest part of any NCA operation. For Slink, it meant enduring the night coiled in tense anticipation beneath the Muller's house. For the rest of us, it was a test of patience against the clock. By 7:30 a.m. the next morning, the mission was complete. Slink returned not to the oak, but to the designated secure drop point, a large, chipped terracotta bowl at the edge of Mrs. Rodriguez's yard, perpetually filled with cool, clean water. This was the hub of the water bowl network, the most reliable, unmonitored communication system in the neighborhood. Slink plunged his head not to drink but to wash. The water instantly carried the success signature, a complex chemical cocktail confirming the completion of the redirective prep, the clean, sharp scent of his own pheromones mixed with the aged wood dust of the Muller porch, and the successful confirmation run. the faint, unmistakable odor of Brutus's recent territorial aggression. Rufus, assigned the role of canine liaison, approached the bowl first, dipping his massive snout to sample the hydrological report. His eyes widened, and a low, guttural growl of awe rumbled in his chest. "It is perfect, Mimi. The time is precise, 7:17 a.m. The approach is confirmed. And yes, the rigid tail is undeniable. The evidence had been transferred not as visual data, which can be faked and misinterpreted by humans, but as olfactory memory, the purest form of truth for the canine mind." Rufus now possessed the complete, irrefutable truth of the Porch Violation, imprinted on his temporal lobe via the molecules in the water. My role, as the Siamese analyst, was to synthesize the report. The evidence is sufficient for a full confrontation. The scent markers are in place. The human element is still blind. We move to Phase 2, the tribunal. Shadow, watching from the high wall, summarized the risk. Brutus is currently unaware of the scent redirection. His internal GPS is set to his default target. When presented with the evidence, his mind will struggle to reconcile his past action with the new territorial reality. This internal conflict will be our leverage. Canine liaison Rufus, now bearing the full weight of the evidence, transmitted the directive across the neighborhood's dog population. Council summons. Fence line. Today. High noon. The water bowl network buzzed with the silent communication, a ripple of thought passing from house to house. Every dog in the 3-block radius, from the timid Maltese to the massive German Shepherd, received the summons. This was not a friendly gathering. This was the invocation of the covenant, demanding the presence of the accused and the victim's liaison. The stakes were no longer just about a porch, they were about the integrity of the NCA and the rule of law in suburbia. The stage was set for the ultimate reckoning, a trial by scent and shadow. 7. The confrontation at the fence line. Confrontation occurred at exactly 12 p.m., high noon, at the chain-link boundary fence separating the Muller and Henderson yards. This fence was chosen as the designated neutral zone, a physical barrier where all territorial scent marking was, by ancient agreement, suspended. Mimi stood on the Muller side, positioned perfectly on a low brick ledge, her posture a statue of righteous indignation. Shadow was draped silently on the roof of the garden shed, acting as security and high-ground observer. On the Henderson side, Rufus stood directly across from me, his presence heavy with the weight of the evidence he carried in his olfactory memory. Brutus, the accused, arrived with all the subtlety of a runaway tractor. He was called out by the solemn barking of the assembled dogs on the periphery. He ambled to the fence, tail performing a slow, lazy sweep, genuinely confused by the mass gathering. He smelled only boredom and the promise of a belly rub. "Brutus of the Henderson house," Rufus intoned, his voice a low, gravelly sound of disappointment. "You stand accused of a structural violation of the first covenant, the porch breach." Brutus blinked his large, simple eyes. He glanced at the Muller's porch, then back at Rufus, his entire internal monologue likely consisting of "What's the problem? And where is the food?" I intervened, cutting through the confusion with sharp, logical clarity. "The offense is not the excretion, Brutus. The offense is the intentionality and the location. You chose a civilized, human aesthetic zone to make a statement of dominance. We know your true nature, Brutus. You are a simple dog, but even simplicity must submit to the covenant." Rufus then performed the crucial act, the olfactory presentation. He projected the full sensory memory of the evidence he had received via the water bowl network, the precise time, 7:17 a.m., the scent signature of the freshly deposited marker, and the key behavioral component, the rigid tail. For the first time, Brutus was forced to confront the truth. Projection hit his simple, powerful canine mind like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his simple reality that his crime was a secret, shattered. His eyes, usually clouded by simple appetite, showed a flicker of confused recognition. He smelled the evidence, he felt the shame. I felt the urge. It was demanding. I saw the geranium. Felt right, Brutus projected, his thought pulse a jumble of panic and self-justification. It felt right because you confused necessity with dominion, Rufus corrected, standing firm. You used the porch as a symbol of your human's perceived status. Confrontation reached its peak, forcing Brutus into a state of profound cognitive dissonance. The evidence was irrefutable. Meanwhile, the humans remained utterly oblivious. Mrs. Muller came out to water her petunias, saw the animals gathered at the fence, and simply waved cheerily at Mr. Henderson, who was cleaning his grill 10 feet away. "Oh, look, Walter, all the neighborhood friends are socializing," Mrs. Muller called out, completely misinterpreting the deadly serious silent tribunal as a casual get-together. Mr. Henderson, the loud walker, glanced over, grunted, and went back to his grill, entirely unaware that the fate of his domestic tranquility was being decided 10 feet away by a beagle and a Siamese cat. The absurdity of the human's blindness only strengthened the NCA's sense of mission. Brutus was defeated, his actions exposed, but the problem, the human element's negligence, remained. The moral victory was won, but the practical solution still required Phase 3, the redirected solution. The human escalation. The animal's silent tribunal may have broken Brutus's confidence, but it did nothing to solve the problem for the humans. The Mullers, finally tired of the recurring foul stain that now required serious chemical intervention, a scent Mimi found personally offensive, decided to take direct action. Mrs. Muller, armed with a bottle of industrial-strength enzymatic cleaner and a look of tight-lipped fury, marched across the lawn to confront Mr. Henderson. The NCA watched, fascinated, as the clumsy, emotionally explosive human escalation began. "Walter, that is the 4th time this week. I saw Brutus out there this morning, running loose. If you can't control your dog, you need to keep him confined." Mrs. Muller shouted, her voice a high-frequency assault on the quiet suburban air. Mr. Henderson, the loud walker, was instantly defensive, his volume level increasing to match the threat. "Don't you dare blame Brutus. My fence is secure. He's a good dog. You probably left a scent attractant out there to bait him. People do that, you know. Try keeping your porch clean." The accusation of leaving bait was a classic human maneuver, denial and counteraccusation, immediately escalating a simple problem into an intractable feud about character and intent. Rufus groaned, his head resting on his paws. They are deploying the blame projection tactic. This will not resolve the territorial conflict. It will merely rearrange the chairs on the sinking ship. I, Mimi, observed the entire interaction from my high vantage point on the roof, enjoying the pure theatricality of their failure. The humans, lacking the ability to process olfactory truth or complex psychological patterns, were forced to rely on shouted language and abstract concepts like bait and blame. Their entire conflict was built on falsehoods and assumptions. The tension was now palpable, the air thick with human anger, which smelled metallic and vaguely unpleasant, a scent completely different from honest canine aggression. The escalation was exactly what I had predicted. The human element, left to its own devices, would never find the simple systemic flaw, the loose gate latch and the morning TV ritual. They would only resort to tribal warfare. This provided the perfect cover for Phase 3. The argument between the two humans created a massive sensory diversion, a large, confusing cloud of noise and aggressive pheromones that masked the subtle work of the NCA. Now that the loud walker was focused entirely on defending his honor, he would not notice the final, critical manipulation. The stage was set for the final act of behavioral engineering. The NCA had failed to convince Brutus, and the humans had failed to communicate. The solution now lay entirely in reprogramming Brutus's internal GPS and making the correction appear to be a consequence of the loud walker's own actions.
Subscribe with us now and stay connected as we journey through every chapter together. Now back to our story.
9. The redirected solution. The final operation, the redirected solution, was executed under the sensory cover of the ongoing human feud. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Mueller continued their passive-aggressive warfare, sniping at each other over property lines and lawn ornaments, creating a perfect distraction. The plan hinged on a singular target within the Henderson yard, the Loud Walker's prize-winning hybrid rosebush. This bush was the human's true, unacknowledged territorial marker, a point of aesthetic pride, obsessively tended and protected. Destroying the bush was a direct attack on the Loud Walker's ego, the one thing guaranteed to elicit an extreme reaction. Mimi led the two-part operation. First, the scent marker amplification. While Slink had performed the initial subtle marking, the redirective prep, I now required a massive, unmissable boost. I supervised Rufus, who was instructed to perform a series of calculated, high-volume scent marking maneuvers around the perimeter of the rosebush. Rufus, understanding the gravity of the mission, abandoned his usual parliamentary reserve and sprayed a highly concentrated, deliberate scent barrage that effectively screamed this is the most important territorial zone in the entire neighborhood. The scent was so powerful, it instantly overpowered all of Brutus's previous porch associations. Second, the olfactory GPS reset. Shadow, using his innate feline mastery of pressure points and friction, meticulously manipulated the loose gate latch on the Henderson fence. He didn't lock it, but he applied a microscopic amount of tree sap to the mechanism. This ensured that when the Loud Walker gave Brutus his 7:15 a.m. freedom ritual, the latch would hold for precisely 2 seconds longer than usual before finally yielding to Brutus's full-body impact. Combined effect was psychological warfare engineered for a simple canine mind. The delay at the gate created a micro-moment of confusion, momentarily breaking Brutus's focus on his old target. In that split second, Brutus's powerful olfactory sensors would lock onto the new, amplified scent, the overwhelming signal coming directly from the rosebush. The next morning, the NCA watched from various concealed locations. The human ritual proceeded flawlessly, the caffeine ritual, the screen paralysis, the leash fetish. Then came the critical moment, the fence drop. The Loud Walker unclipped the leash and retreated to the television. Brutus lunged toward his accustomed gap in the rosebush line, expecting the gate to fly open. It held for a heart-stopping 2 seconds. Confusion. In that brief temporal window, Brutus smelled not the distant, faint memory of the porch, but the immediate, overwhelming territorial priority of the powerfully marked rosebush. His simple, powerful mind reset its target. Instead of making the habitual turn toward the Mueller porch, Brutus veered sharply, following the scent signal into the rose garden. Consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Brutus, driven by the urgency of his morning necessity and the powerful territorial signal, not only relieved himself on the Loud Walker's beloved prize winner but, in his typical bovine enthusiasm, proceeded to roll in the mulch and snap 3 perfect prize-winning buds. The mission was a success. Brutus's target was redirected, the first covenant was protected, and the consequences of negligence were brought directly home. 10. The covenant is restored. The climax was marked not by silence, but by a sound far more satisfying to the NCA than any human apology, the Loud Walker's furious, primal scream. Mr. Henderson, exiting his house at 7:45 a.m., encountered the scene, the desecrated rosebush, the scattered mulch, and Brutus, looking utterly proud of his expertly executed territorial maneuver, covered in mud and rose petals. The human's roar of pure anguish echoed across the quiet street. He did not blame the Muellers for leaving bait. He did not blame the fence company. He blamed the only available, visible perpetrator, Brutus. The subsequent human response was a cascade of immediate, decisive action. Within the hour, Mr. Henderson had installed a massive, expensive chain-link containment pen in his backyard, a kennel of confinement. Brutus was removed from the general population and placed under what Rufus termed absolute sensory restriction. Porch problem was, at long last, permanently solved, achieved not through human communication or animal confrontation, but through the flawless application of behavioral engineering and scent redirection. The NCA reconvened that afternoon at the Pin Oak. The mood was one of quiet, professional satisfaction. "The integrity of the covenant has been restored," Rufus declared, his ears now held high with pride. "The problem, the flaw in the human element, has been corrected by making the human suffer the consequences of his own negligence on his most valued asset. Brutus is confined. Porches are clean." Slink, the operative, received a silent nod of commendation and immediately retreated to begin his next self-assigned task, hunting a dust bunny. Shadow vanished, his thoughts already focused on the next potential threat, the neighborhood's excessive use of leaf blowers. I, Mimi, observed the now pristine Muller porch from a distance. The scent of enzymatic cleaner was fading, replaced by the clean smell of sun-drenched wood. I settled onto my favorite sun-warmed concrete slab. The entire operation, the squirrel interrogation, the scent manipulation, the confrontation, had required immense effort, but the result was worth the expenditure of energy. The NCA had proven that while humans control the territory through ownership and noise, the animals control the covenant through instinct, observation, and the supreme power of olfactory truth. The quiet, icy satisfaction of knowing that Brutus's owner, the loud walker, had been forced to confine his dog not because of his neighbor's complaints, but because his prize roses were destroyed, was the sweetest reward. The balance was maintained. The Suburbia Scrolls were updated with a new, complex case study of human failure and animal genius. The neighborhood was safe for now.